Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the regular city council meeting for March 18th, and I'd like to ask everybody in the audience that can to stand as we start every meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. The American transportation system is going to change our quorum tonight. Councilmember Darren is stranded in Fort Lauderdale because they don't have enough planes that aren't in that one that's grounded. So he'll be here sometime later tonight. And Mr. Gardner is stranded in New York City because Amtrak is not tracking for some reason, and so he jumped on a bus and he's heading this way, but I don't expect him to get here today. But so it affects us in unanticipated ways. Agenda deletions and amendments. Council would like to strike item B in the new business. The COG group ran into an unscheduled conflict, so they're going to reschedule for some date in the future. City Manager?
Mr. Mayor and City Council, I have no report today. Thank you.
All right. Brevity. All right, Council, you have a consent agenda, items A through C. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Marco, second by Dr. Trout. Any questions on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. New business, we've got the Stronach Group from Maryland Horse Racing. Can you, sir? Welcome, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait a minute.
Yep.
I forgot this special. I did have one person signed up to speak. Can you get that for me, Councilman? Thank you. They all just kind of blended in there together. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Del Billings, welcome, sir. Good to see you.
Thank you, sir. I'm here just to say a couple of words by the name. I'm Del Billings. I'm the current chair of the Public Safety Committee here at Bowie. And our charge by you all is to represent the citizens of Bowie and make comments and recommendations and issues relative to public safety for our citizens. And tonight we're going to hear a presentation from the chief about the progress of the department. And I have been personally honored and privileged to witness this department from a single person, which was Chief Perez, up to the level of it is today, including the advancements and the developments that the police department has done so well over the past number of years. That being said, and we also are very pleased that the council has been able to keep the budget flat and not do the increase that the citizens voted for when we voted to have a police department here in Bowie. Now, that being said, I think we're coming to a crossroads over the next number of years, and on behalf of the Public Safety Committee, we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 20,000 additional residents. Take a look at how many new houses are projected over the numbers of years, not counting transient involvement of people working and shopping in this area. We're growing quite substantially. The other issue that is going to happen during that period of time of expansion of people and residents, some of our senior staff and command staff are going to become eligible for retirement. So we're looking potentially at having a need for additional patrol officers, but also a replacement plan for executive command officer level individuals. So the Public Safety Committee, in our budget request, Mr. City Manager and members of the council, will be recommending that there be a 3 to 5 year plan developed to plan for this and to commit to doing those steps necessary in order to ensure that our city remains as safe as it is. We're lucky that we have a very, very safe city, that our officers do a great job at controlling it. They just did a great job at finding an individual who was lost. and had to be found with cooperation of a number of other individuals. We need to make sure that continues. We need to make sure that we have sufficient officers on board. And sometimes that may be difficult decisions on the city council's part relative to the budget. So again, thank you. Thank Chief Neske, his command staff, and all the officers for the excellent job they do. They certainly are upfront and straight with us from the public safety perspective about where they are and what's going on here in the city, and we truly appreciate that.
Okay.
And also, on behalf of the Public Safety Committee, we're here to serve you, since we're appointed by you, in the areas that you believe that we should progress.
Okay.
I'd be happy to take any questions or whatever.
Any questions, Argo?
Council.
Go.
I got one very quick question.
Yes,
So
sir.
right now, thanks for coming out, by the way, tonight. So right now, one of the biggest challenges the police department has, which they'll likely reiterate later tonight, is that there's an organic cap on their personnel by virtue of just challenges with recruitment, which is a challenge nationwide right now. Do you guys have any advice or any thoughts on that as you and the Public Safety Committee are talking?
It's very difficult, obviously, because anybody that is recruited needs to meet certain standards, and that's very difficult. And I think that's being experienced not just by Bowie Police Department, but by governments in general, even the agency that I retired from, to get certain clearances and top secret clearances. It's very, very difficult in some cases, depending on past occasions of sin, so to speak. So we do need to build that and look at that. I do have to say, along with what I said earlier, it does take, number one, by the time you identify the need for an officer, to the time that officer is fully trained and be able to operate on their own, it can take up to a year and a half, maybe 2 years to get sufficient qualified officers. That's a long time to wait for a good officer to come on board. And I'm talking about a new recruit, not a transfer. So again, that's why I think it would be beneficial for the department with the city managers and with the agreement from the city council and the commitment from the city council to ensure that happens.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
All right, thank you, sir. On behalf of all of us, thank you and your members of the committee for what you do and constantly looking at these issues and bringing things to our attention.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Appreciate it.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, now I can get back to our guest tonight is from the Stronach Group from the Maryland Horse Racing. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm Mike Johansson with the Rifkin firm in Annapolis. I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Jockey Club. Joining me is Sal Sinatra. He's the president and general manager of the Maryland Jockey Club. So there is a presentation. Each of you should have one. Sal will walk you through that. Very much open to any questions that you have. And in addition, I'll give you a little bit of an update on some of the legislative issues in Annapolis, which are very current.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I just thought it'd be necessary to give you a little background on the Stronach Group and our current holdings as we look into reviving Bowie as a training center and a world-class training center, as we're calling it right now. We're one of the largest operators, if not the largest operators of racetracks across America. We probably take in 40% of the wagers across the U.S. Our sister company, Amtote, up in Hunt Valley, processes about 80% of the wagers across the world. We're very focused in the state of Maryland. Obviously, we hold Pimlico, Laurel, Bowie, and recently Rosecroft, which is a new learning experience for me as a standardbred, but it is growing, and we're excited about it. Our company was or the Maryland Jockey Club was actually founded in 1743, and this is one of the things we're going to try and do as we build out. It's the oldest sports franchise or name in the country. George Washington was a member. We've been investing in Maryland racing since me and Tim have been there probably since the end of 2014, and growing Laurel Signal. Maryland racing has had somewhat of a revival. Handle numbers have gone from 325,000 in 2014 to well over 600,000 this past year. The breeding has gone up by double digits each of the last 4 years, unheard of in the country, let alone nearby states. So it's an investment from a lot of people, a lot of farms, and it's good for us. As Mike alluded to, we do have a couple of bills in Annapolis to try and help us We're trying to serenade Breeders' Cup to run at Laurel. One of the things they require is some premier seating and such, which we're calling a super track at Laurel. But in order for me to have a super track year-round, I need horse inventory. And Laurel currently has a little under 1,200 horses. In the past, we've had just around 1,000 horses here at Bowie. And because of its 20-mile proximity distance to Laurel, we want to look at Maryland racing as we do our other tracks. At Gulfstream, we have a state-of-the-art facility called Palm Meadows, which a good supply of our horses train at. It allows them to train longer in the morning so they're not rushed. We can offer other things at training centers that you can't allow at racetracks just because of timing and such with the races going on. So we're looking at Bowie with whirlpools. We're looking possibly putting a synthetic track inside the dirt track, which is for, if anybody's paying attention recently, breakdowns of horses is high topic, and synthetics are very kind to horses. We're thinking at giving that as an option to trainers, and just an overall better feeling than just being a conveyor belt of horses over there at Bowie. Again, the Bowie plan on page 8, or what Bowie currently is, having engineers, we haven't done anything over there, but we're having engineers look at where and what we could put barns at. Highly likely to try and salvage the Hacienda, which is that oval barn, only because of its uniqueness, and it's an indoor arena for horses to train in bad weather. But I'm hoping to put in all brand new barns with washed off for the EPA. Obviously, we have a runoff issue we have to satisfy for the neighborhood. We've been pointing fingers back and forth and trying to help out. We need to satisfy that for good. We're talking about putting in a track kitchen for the people that possibly local, and I need some input from communities, if communities would like to have access to that track kitchen to watch the horses train or jogging paths. We're looking for some input as well as we design this facility. And I'm really excited about it. I'm a racing guy, and this is like my pet project, so I hope I get good help and I can be a good neighbor to the people down here. Thank you.
Great. So, Mr. Mayor, in Annapolis, there's been a lot of talk about the future of Maryland racing and some of the needs and issues. We've come together to talk about Laurel, Bowie, and also Pimlico. The Maryland Stadium Authority did a second report on Pimlico. It recommended, as far as a vision, a rebuilding of the racetrack, as well as an integrated facility with development surrounding the racetrack. Their vision of what Pimlico would look like in the future, if it is funded and if it is rebuilt, would mean that year-round racing and training would occur somewhere other than Pimlico. In order to have an integrated project with 365 activity, they would not have training at Pimlico nor horses there on a year-round basis. So the need for Bowie arises whether Pimlico stays as a venue for the Preakness or whether something else happens there. Those horses need to come somewhere, the ones that are currently at Pimlico. As Laurel gets developed, Bowie is the natural place for long-term training. In Annapolis, we, the Maryland Jockey Club, are supporting two initiatives to help facilitate the Laurel project and the Bowie project. The first one's a bill introduced by Senator Peters and also by Delegate Geraldine Valentino Smith. It would allow Bowie to be eligible for existing state funds called Racetrack Facility Renewal Funds. Right now, since Bowie is a training center, it was not eligible when that law was passed in 2007 and 2012. I'm pleased to report that Senate Bill 878, sponsored by Senator Peters, was reported out favorably in committee, in the Budget and Tax Committee, and was voted favorably on second reading in the Senate today, and we're hopeful that that bill will make its way all the way through. The second piece of legislation is what we call the Medco bill, and what it would allow is Maryland Economic Development Corporation to facilitate the financing of projects at Laurel and Bowie by the issuance of bonds based on funds and collateral provided by the Stronach Group, as well as the current stream of RFRA dollars, which are a portion of slot proceeds. generated from the state's casinos. That project in total would be about $80 million at Laurel, about $40 million in Bowie. Again, very rough estimates, right? No construction bids yet, but just to kind of give you a sense of the ballpark. And if that legislation proceeds, Medco would be in a position, if the bonds could be underwritten, if the investment market is right, they could help facilitate the construction of those projects on a faster basis. And the reason it's somewhat important to us is the state funding for racetrack facility trickles in about $8 million a year. And in order to do a $120 million project in about an 18-month period, we're trying to push forward those funds, matched by funds from the Stronach Group, in an effort to get those projects started and completed in a relatively short period of time. Right now, neither the House nor the Senate has passed what I call the Medco bill. It's still under serious consideration, and we're very hopeful that they'll look upon it favorably before we get out of there April 8th, which is when session ends. So happy to answer any questions that you or the members may have.
Well, first off, let me thank you for the effort that you guys have extended to the courtesy to come here tonight and to meet with us and to meet with our delegates as this process is going on. But before I do that, I just wanted to notice that my favorite delegate from 23B, is Dr. Ron Watson, has joined us tonight. And thank you. And we have a Central Committee Representative Ingrid Harrison here. Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate both of you coming. Questions, Mr. Stebb? No. Did you have questions for our guests?
I got several. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, gentlemen.
Sure.
I appreciate your joining us. Just a few quick things. One, with potential investment in Bowie, is there any consideration for road improvements along Racetrack Road, both to facilitate safe entry and exit of the facility, as well as safer pedestrian crossing?
Sure. I mean, to the extent that the county and the city look at those projects, we certainly will participate. The traffic shouldn't be more than it was when we were active. In fact, horses actually race fewer times than they used to. It's one of the reasons why we need our horse population to increase. Right now, Laurel is racing Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So the traffic in order to get horses from the training center to the racetrack occurs on limited days, but we're certainly happy to talk to you in the county as to those needs as they arise.
Sure. For the parcels that currently abut the homes, right, on the, I guess, east side of Racetrack Road or west side of Racetrack Road, it looks like that's where the bulk of the stalls are going to be located in the plan for the redevelopment. Things are going to more or less stay there.
Correct.
Well, that was first blush. This is my architect in Canada, actually, trying to put something together for me. I've also left the green ones up there because I was kind of, there's obviously land over there to go, but I have to move land and I got to find out what I can probably eliminate a few of those ones, put some over there. It's, I've met with the people that live there, and I've been in Mr. Honeymore's yard and stuff, and I see the concerns. So I know anything I can do to help, whether I got to put hedgerows, or I got to keep the barns away and put more shrubbery or whatever to protect their property, I'd be glad to do it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think the biggest concern that I'm hearing from residents in that area is just noise and smell.
Yeah.
Associated with the horses being in proximity.
Understood.
So anything you can do to work with us on that would be very much
100%.
Great.
appreciated. Those are the biggest things that I have. So it sounds like compared to when this was being used as a training facility before, you're not anticipating many more additional horses than there were when this was being used prior.
Well, unfortunately, the national foal crops dropped below 20,000. So between Laurel and here, if I had 2,000, that's 10% of all the horses in America. So I really don't see it growing that much
Gotcha.
at all.
Understood.
But it also depends on the trend. So as I mentioned, if horses race fewer times, in a year, in order to still run the same number of race days, you still need to increase the population. As we look at this site in total, there are discussions about putting some additional stalls inside the oval as well as some facilities related to therapy for horses, and kind of medical, physical therapy for horses. So, it could be an addition of other amenities on the property or in addition to more horses themselves.
Gotcha. I know that a lot of things are up in the air right now. What is the general timeframe that you're hoping for to be able to move forward on this project?
So, if we have favorable results with the legislation, the process related to Medco bonds is still a 6 to 7 month process, would require approval of the plans by the Racing Commission. Medco is a public body, would go through its underwriting process, as well as take a public vote at that meeting. Project at Laurel could start, if everything goes well, right after Maryland Million of this year, the third Saturday in October. We could begin that work inside the clubhouse. This work could follow, but just to be clear, we haven't asked for any permits yet or anything like that, so we certainly need to work through all those issues at the local level. So you'll probably be the first to know when we start that active process.
Gotcha. And prior to that, just to be clear, any work that you do would be subject to conceptual site plan reviews and whatnot?
Absolutely.
Whatever's in
Okay.
place, correct.
Just to be clear. And then in the event of the worst case scenario, or in the event that the project is sort of downgrade, do you envision the future ever putting this property up for sale for development of any kind? Currently it's zoned for low density residential.
I'd have to ask my bosses. I mean, right now, as I've been saying, Annapolis, like the last couple of years, we've been holding it to bring it back as a training center. But anything can happen. Whether the Medco bill fails, and they decide to put everything at Laurel. I don't think Laurel can handle all those horses. I still think that there's going to be a need for Bowie if the industry keeps growing in Maryland with the hope to run year-round. If it's not a training center, then yeah, I would think that the only thing they would do is to sell it.
Gotcha.
I can't imagine.
And under the current plan, the full use of the parcel looks like would be in fact used for the training, and there wouldn't be a portion allocated for a different project or other development. It would all pretty much go to the training facility.
No, I actually talked to Tim because there were some fields down, I don't know which direction, but down on the one turn. If we don't build it out, and like I said, at some point we'd like to sit with the community and see what their needs are. We do have a lot of land around there. If there's some things that we can do to help them. I'm going to help the university using parking for graduation. I have a message about the soccer club wanting to have some games there. So, we only really train until roughly noon. Once the horses go over to Laurel to run, the place is pretty quiet, and it's a lot of open space that could be used for other things.
Gotcha. Okay. Understood. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Wolfley?
Thank you for coming out. We really appreciate it, and it's always good to hear about at least what the current concepts are, and we'll see how it shakes out. So thank you very much for your time and that you've taken to come out. A couple questions for you. I've heard that you mentioned about the open space and so forth, and that was one of the thoughts I had was what could we do with some of this open space that's not really, in some cases, usable for too much because it's watershed area, in terms of using it for parkland or, park and planning might be able to, have some interest, as to your point about, some fields or what have you, multi-use. I think it'd be great if there was an opportunity to kind of make this a multi-use facility in terms of something that's an opportunity for the community. I could even see us, here in Bowie having this long legacy of horse racing history behind us. It'd be nice if there's some sort of kind of heritage aspect of this that kind of sustains that in the future. I'm glad to hear the commentary about getting the neighbors involved, because that's a significant issue. You've touched on them already. Obviously, the sights and smells and don't necessarily always comport with the one's expectation of your neighbor. So that'd be good to make sure that we cover that. Housing, has there been any discussion about housing on premise for employees and the like?
That we haven't discussed with the horsemen as yet. Normally, I would have to have some sort of dormitories. Obviously, the ones that are there, I don't think are functional anymore. I'm hoping to level everything and obviously up to code and stuff, but yes. I would imagine they're going to ask me to do that as well.
Yeah. So what type, typically, what did you have there before in terms of?
They usually had a small room, 12 by 12 type room, shared bathroom facility. That was fine in the 1960s and such. It's not today. In fact, I'm trying to build new dorms over at Laurel.
Yeah.
More of apartment type.
Sure, sure. So what kind of volumes would that be?
Generally, we have a room for every 8 to 10 horses.
Okay.
So 100 rooms maybe
All right.
for 1,000 horses.
I've heard some mention before about another training location north of Laurel or in that area. Is that still in the?
Fair Hill up in northeast.
Yes.
Yes.
How does that all
Cecil
fit in
County.
with this?
That's they privately buy their own barns on that property there.
Okay.
So nobody really, they're under no guidance. They run wherever they feel like running. If they run with us, we try and get them to run at Laurel, but they have no loyalty to any of us.
But as an option for some of the horsemen from north of the city, they could. We've talked about whether or not to, since it's a pay training facility, whereas, Bowie and Laurel, they're not paid. The expectation is they run. But if we could work out some arrangement to help subsidize their training costs for those who are too far away, maybe then we can encourage them to run at Laurel.
You mentioned earlier a comment about the health of the industry, and you said there was a growing number of attendees at Laurel. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, Laurel's actually been a real blue chip in the industry of late, Maryland racing in particular. It's gone, as I keep calling it, a renaissance. Back when I worked in New Jersey in the 80s and such, Maryland racing was in high regard, and then when everybody got slots and Maryland was like the last state to get them, just the true blue horsemen that stayed on were here, and now we're trying to revive it back, and there's a really good feeling right now, yes.
Okay. So to what do we attribute that? Anything in particular?
I think it's a generation of horsemen that stayed and waited, and the good horsemen. They have a philosophy here to breed a good horse. They're looking to win the Preakness. They're not just looking to survive, as in other states. They had just good horsemen. That's really what I have to say in breeders.
The other thing is the Maryland General Assembly, when they passed the slots legislation, they created a fund for purses, which help us elevate the purses competitive to other states, and that is actually attracting more horses. It's attracting more breeding interest, investment in long-term breeding operations. In addition, that legislation also created this fund, which helps the racetrack owner fund, on a dollar-for-dollar basis. We put $1 in, we get $1 from the state in order to make some of these modest renovations that we have, with the goal of, if we get that other bill passed, we can kind of make a bigger renovation all at one time.
Okay,
But
great.
certainly the legislation that the state has passed has helped us quite a bit.
Good. Well, I thank you for coming out. Again, I'll just emphasize, our neighbors, obviously, a paramount concern for us. Thank you for the improvements on some of the aesthetics improvements that we've seen already, the fencing, that sort of thing. I did notice that there's a repair of some sort needed on the bridge. We could benefit from a little patch job there, but as we're going forward, I think that's a big thing for the community to see that, this really is something that can be turned into a more attractive scene. So thank you very much.
That's our goal. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Trout?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you both for your presentation. Just have a couple of questions, and one of them is just a recap, and that is, I just want to make sure that I got the clear understanding that you promised to give us and the residents, when I say us, I'm talking about the council and the neighbors, notification, but advance notification on any proposed changes that you're going to make
Yes,
throughout
absolutely.
that
Yes.
particular development, right?
Yeah, as this project unfolds, I'd like to certainly come back to you guys and the
Right.
community to say this is what we're really thinking.
Right, because we like to get advance notice before, like when you're thinking about doing the permitting, could you come to us and the neighbors before you actually do the permitting?
Promise I will. Yeah.
Okay. Heard the word open space. Just want to know, this is a left field question, I guess, but in the open space that you have at your facility, Is it possible to do fireworks there on the 4th of July?
Well, depends who you ask. I have done them at my Philadelphia track. They call them silent fireworks, but they're not silent. They just don't bang as loud.
Horses really enjoy that?
Yeah, if done properly, and if the barns were on one side and we did it, I'm sure we could probably accommodate that somehow.
So that's something that we can really talk about
Yes.
Downstream, because we are, looking for places
For sure.
to give our residents the 4th of July fireworks.
Yes.
And we're looking for a safe facility.
Okay.
So that would work. And then my last question is there any way, or are you planning on doing a linkage from the racetrack around where the communities are to the trail system?
I know, and I don't have the real estate guys with me, but I know the little water canoe route
Right.
that ends to Patapsco, I guess it goes by Laurel, comes all the way up here, and we were talking about it. And that's why I said jogging tracks, bike,
Right.
Bike routes,
Right.
dog track, walking
Right.
dogs, whatever, yet. We're trying to become a 365 destination, whether it's Laurel, Gulfstream, or Santa Anita.
Okay.
We see it's wide open space, beautiful. Horses are great to see training, and why not have a cup of coffee and, walk and see them as well.
Okay, all righty. Is there any way, or do you have in your plans to do, I know I said that was my last question, but I had another one. But is there any thinking in the plans to have some sort of a relationship or with Bowie State University where you actually have like a program to help the kids as far as not mentoring, but
Like internship type.
Yeah, an
or
internship.
horsemanship. I would love to do that.
I know that, I don't know if I don't think they have horse racing there, but
No,
maybe
but
there's.
We can, animal husbandry where we're there,
Right,
that
right.
kind of thing.
Very interested in those conversations.
Okay,
Yeah, no, 100%. I know my horseman would support that as well.
all right, thank you.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for being here tonight. I want to just make a couple of summary questions. Over the years, we've had some challenges at the site that had kind of fallen into disrepair. But I want to say publicly, since you've come on board, Mr. Sinatra, I felt that we were seeing a lot of movement up there. I know that you were responsible largely for the initial cleanup of the site and for the installation of the new fence up there. So both of those are noted and appreciated. The conversation you were mentioning tonight about world-class training center, that's the standards that you're committed to.
Yes,
And that's
100%.
what, quite frankly, we will look at me to hold you to it. As Mr. Wolfley noted, horse racing has a long history here. And I don't know if you noticed it or not. I don't know if you noticed the mobile, the hanging in the foyer when you came in, the 3-layer thing.
Yes.
And I hope you noticed that those are black-eyed Susans.
Yes.
And it has some relationship to the Preakness, because horse racing is intertwined in our history. We want to work together with you guys. We want to see this, if it's going to be developed as a world-class training center, that's our goal and that's our standard. We truly appreciate the offer to, stay in touch and work with the stakeholders and work with the neighbors so that everybody knows ahead of time what's proposed and how it might get done and how you mean to do it. And we're quite committed to work with you on those. We support the legislation that you had laid in there about allowing Bowie track to become a potential recipient of some of the money that's going in there. And I did want to note that a lot of the money that's going in this is all private funding.
Yes.
And money that comes from gambling, which I always consider a self-imposed tax. Hopefully that as this thing goes forward, it'll work out. I say it's a part of our history, and we're just, I said we've had some challenges in the past, but like I said, since you've been there, I really want to thank you for the efforts that you and your group have done to try to bring it back up. So we're interested in what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, and how it's going to interact with the community. And while I'm on that, I don't want to not miss the opportunity to, thank Mr. Lucci for his leadership up there and the lobbying effort and trying to bring a lot of people together to get something done. And this is one of those cases where I really want to thank our delegation in Annapolis. Senator Peters, I see our Delegate Watson is here, and I really want to thank Delegate Valentino Smith for her leadership in this. She's done a very credible job. I mean, she represents 23A, obviously, so she has that interest. But more than that, I think she has a long history of working with you guys to try to get something accomplished. So on behalf of all of us, I want to acknowledge, the role that our delegation has played in trying to get this done and move it forward. And I'm sorry, I meant to include everybody, and Marvin Holmes is in our delegate from 23B. It's a whole nother argument. I never understand why we have a 23A and a 23BB. So why don't we have 23AA and BB? But that's something for another discussion. But thank you again for coming in tonight. We really appreciate it. I know it's outside of your normal day, but it's a matter of interest to you and a matter of interest to us. So you have now set the standard.
Yes.
World-class training facility.
That's
right. So that's what we're going to hold you to. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
By the way, if you want to, sometime when you come down here, I have about a 6-foot-long photograph upstairs in my office.
Okay.
Opening day, Bowie Racetrack, 1915.
Oh.
And the things that you notice when you first look at it is like all that's there was the stands. All the men in the stands are wearing suit and ties, and all the women are dressed like they've gone out to a ball somewhere. And the starting gate is 2 guys holding a string. You've advanced somewhat since then, but it was interesting to watch what it looked like in 1915. Anyway, thanks again.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, item next is the Bowie Police Department update. And with that, I'll turn to the city manager.
Yeah, just real quick. Real quickly. Good evening. Yeah.
I didn't know we'd been joined by Delegate Holmes. Welcome, sir. Good to see you. Thankfully, we just said something nice about you. Thankfully, we just said something nice about you. Are you ready, sir? All
Yes,
right.
sir.
Chief, you're on.
Thank you. Good evening. A little bit of a warning. I'm severely jet lagged at the moment. I see 2 of each of you, so if I start to ramble a little bit, please indulge me. Just a quick video. I've been gone for about 18 days over in Abu Dhabi. I had the distinct privilege and honor of
This is not a new beach structure, is it?
No. I had the distinct privilege and honor to represent Maryland law enforcement along with 128 other law enforcement folks from all over the world as we ran the Flame of Hope across all the United Arab Emirates for the World Games for Special Olympics. So somewhere on the other side of the world, there's a commander having his coffee with a Bowie Police Department mug. So I thought that was kind of cool, but just a real quick video if you'll indulge me. Just an absolutely gorgeous country. Kind of a trip of a lifetime, I think. But that's where I've been. That's where why my head is a different color than the rest of me at the moment. But on to the real numbers here. You hopefully have the memo. We talked earlier about staffing. We currently have 3 openings. which means we have 59 actual bodies on the street. We have 4 in the academy. 1 is out on medical. To Dell's point, it does take a while to grow a functioning officer. We are getting ready to give the next written test, I think in a week or so, to try to get some folks in the next academy. Recruitment, to the councilman's comment, recruitment remains a challenge. With the changing of marijuana laws and the medical aspects of cannabis, it still cuts down because our standards and under COMAR, our hiring standards have not changed in response to as far as cannabis goes. So that does cut out a lot of candidates sometimes, and it is a challenge giving some of the trials that the profession has been under lately. It's not exactly people's #1 priority and job choice. It's just a shifting of generations as well. And so we are doing our best to change our recruitment. We do hit a lot of career fairs. We do military transition points to try to be the next opportunity for somebody. And as a profession as a whole, we've had to change the way that we do things. When Deputy Chief and I were first starting out, it was usually 50 to 100 candidates for one slot. You were turning people away left and right versus really trying to sell yourself as a viable career option. We are fully staffed on our civilian side right now. We just hired our last dispatcher with 1 to start in the coming weeks, so we are fully staffed in the communications center. Along that lines, you'll see the update on call numbers and status in the packet. Our city radio project is almost complete. We have a go-live date of May 1st for the park rangers, code compliance, and animal control. This puts everybody on the city side on one radio channel, or not channel, but one radio system. So we'll be able to monitor and respond better to both the residents and to the code compliance folks or the animal and park ranger personnel that may have an issue on the street or in the parks. It provides a better layer of safety for them versus them having to go over a cell phone and try to get help. We continue our outreach efforts. We are currently looking for new candidates for the City Police Academy, or the Citizens Police Academy. We have a drug take-back happening June 2nd, I believe is the next one. We continue to do our Coffee with a Cop events and Tip a Cop events for various fundraisers. We continue to have our weekly crime meetings, looking at trends and what's happening and productivity out on the road. We've been trying to refocus our efforts on the HOAs, having them have a single point of contact for the department to better get a grip on some of the issues that may be underlying in communities that we may not be aware of on the surface. We continue to work on our social media and information sharing through Twitter, Facebook, things of that nature, trying to be more active and get out there more. Along the lines of the social media, I don't know if anyone's aware of Nextdoor, the app that a lot of people use. It's a good app. It's a useful app. What I would like to caution people is that at this point in time, there's no way for us to see everything that's happening on Nextdoor throughout the city. It's neighborhood specific. So oftentimes people go to Nextdoor thinking that we're monitoring all of it, but we're not. We're unable to. We happen to see things. We registered in the in this section, and we've got 1 or 2 folks that registered on their own in other sections trying to monitor things. But to that point, I would really greatly encourage people to contact us directly if you have an issue or concern in your neighborhood, because if it's on Nextdoor and it's an outlying neighborhood that's not attached to us, we're not going to see it. Oftentimes, people vent or people ask questions and wonder. We had one that, try to be kind here. It started as a question about a response time on a couple calls, and it kind of grew as things on the internet does into, we took a little bit of bashing about how long it took. It took us an hour to get someplace. Well, when we finally noticed the post and we were able to backtrack it, both calls we were there within 11 minutes. Not 60 minutes, but it's like that game of social media telephone tag. It changes every little bit. So I would please greatly urge folks to contact us directly. If we've been delayed and it's a slow response time, we'll tell you we were delayed. We'll tell you what the response time was on any call that you need. If it's our fault, we own it. If it's the fact that we were stuck on other calls, we'll tell you that as well. But we can't give you an answer if we don't get the question. So I would really, really stress that we encourage folks to reach out and talk to us. Before I dive into the packet, I'd also just like to take a second and highlight something that happened on, the incident happened on March 7th. It started out as a strong-arm robbery, but the detectives chased the suspect down through various leads and investigation methods, and was able to identify the suspect, got numerous search warrants, and ended up recovering, additionally, outside of the strong-arm robbery charge, additionally recovered 3.5 pounds of marijuana and 3.5 pounds of edibles, taking about $61,000 worth of product, illegal product off the street. And even given the medical cannabis and things like that, there's still a lot of stuff out there that's just illegal to possess and illegal to sell, and that often brings another chain, because the robbery was attached to the illegal sale of the edibles and the marijuana. So it is a continuing issue that we try to stay on top of. But digging into the packet, I'm just going to go quickly an overview, and I'll be happy to answer questions if anybody wants to dig deeper into to the numbers or any other concerns that we have. You'll see the total calls for service in 2018 was 39,718, a bit of a jump from 2017, but keep in mind 2017 we only had partial numbers for December because that's when we switched over to our own dispatch. But the totals for 2017 were 22,818. Now, some of that jump is more calls for service from residents, and some is more proactive engagement by the officers. So when the officers call out on a self-initiated call, that goes in as a call for service as well. If you move to page 2 and look at the statistics, we've trended down in some and unfortunately up in some others. Resident burglaries are down considerably. Commercial burglaries, we were kind of caught in an upswing of some folks that were doing it up and down 301, and so those numbers jumped up for us to 33. Assault reports took a little bit of a jump. Auto thefts were down. Robberies were down. Thefts are up by 80. When we dug deeper into the data, a lot of that was fueled by thefts from auto, but even more were shoplifting calls. If we look deeper in the numbers, we jumped. Shoplifting from 2017 was 156, and 2018 was up to 226. So that's a considerable bump in the shoplifting calls. We have been working with retailers. Some of them are more cooperative than others, but we are trying to find a way to help curtail that. Moving violations are up as well. These are things that we're doing. Photo enforcement is down following the trend that we've seen since we replaced the cameras in, which again, it shows that the speed cameras, at least in that particular section, are doing their jobs. If you go to page 4, it talks about the detectives' activities. with the various numbers. Closure rate for assigned cases, about 39%. For total assigned cases, it's 42%. Out of those, we had 51 arrests. 73 were suspended pending further information. Basically means that the detective took it as far as it could go with the information they had. 5 closed exceptionally. Exceptionally usually means that there's some kind of other circumstances that prevents us from going forward. Oftentimes, it's sometimes the victim doesn't want to cooperate. You'll find that there's an assault or there's something that happened, but it was in conjunction with maybe illegal activities, so they don't want to cooperate with us anymore. You go to page 6, it's a list of our community services teams. We broke them up into 2 teams to try to give better coverage during the week. So you see the number of HOA meetings, a number of events and things that they have attended. There's quite a list. We do try to get to as much as we can and try to get face-to-face with the community as much as we can. If you see just Team A participate in 68 community and family fun events. Usually, if you invite us, we come. Sometimes we come if you don't invite us. Let's see, some of the other things that we worked on are again on page 7. And if you look on page 9, we have Community Services Team B, which they seem to be dividing themselves up into factions here. But they took care of a lot of our traffic complaints. And the following pages will show you where they've been, how long they were there, and what the results were. Often what we try to do is if we get a complaint for a specific area, we track how long we've been there, what we're seeing. Is the speeding problem a real problem or is it a perceived problem? Sometimes it's a little bit of both, but we try to get out there and track what we're doing because one of the things that we do like is follow-up. So if the resident calls and said, hey, I called and asked about this, what have you done? We're able to say, here's where we've been, how long we've been here, and what the results were. And that pretty much takes us to training, which is page 15. We have a very robust training program, especially since it's basically two people. But Sergeant Wall and MPO Welsh do an outstanding job of getting out, not only doing our own in-service and training the officers on the new laws and new techniques and defensive tactics and tactical things, but also in conjunction with other city services. I know they're working with the park rangers, code compliance on de-escalation, because they often run into some unhappy people as well, and offering that same training to outside agencies. We also have been out in the community offering active shooter training to various churches and other groups that have asked for it. So they've been fairly busy and proactive. And I'm going to leave it at that and take any questions that you may have regarding in the information that's been covered or something else that I might have missed.
Okay. All right, Dr. Tu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chief, Deputy Chief, for your outstanding report. On the city radio project, I see that you have our internal organization on the same waveband. I'm going to use this term, interoperability. Does that mean that they're also able to communicate with, no? Okay.
It's not the same. There'll be two, because there's a public safety band.
Right.
And then there's the internal city band.
Okay.
And what would happen is if we do need to cross that, it's still monitored in the same dispatch area,
Right.
the same call center. They would just relay that to the public safety side.
Okay.
Now, all of our police radios are interoperable with the county and other agencies that we can turn to their channels. But what we don't want is to have too many people on that police channel
Okay.
So it would go to the call center, and the call center would relay to the public safety side.
Okay, all right, that's good. In the event that we had some sort of an emergency, like the EOC is up and running and so forth and so on, that would be able, you'd be able to take care of that by going on the police band and not going on the city radio?
Right. The EOC would have access to both sides of it. So if you
Okay.
need to communicate with just city staff versus the public side, they'll be able to do that.
Okay. I heard you mention Nextdoor Neighbor, the Nextdoor app and whatnot. We actually, in District 4, we've had good response or good utilization of that, not only with the Bowie Police Department, but also I've been communicating back and forth with a police officer at the county at District 2, because I know he invited me to a couple of, he invited me to last month's District 2 meeting. So that is something that we use periodically in District 4. So maybe we could work on that downstream, but I understand what you're saying right now.
Right,
But
I'm not bad-mouthing the app.
No, I
It's
understand.
a great, it's a
Right.
great app. It's just limited when it's neighborhood-specific, and District 2 is in that neighborhood.
Right.
So that you
Yeah.
can communicate, but, you know, if it's anybody upwind of you, they're not going to get, District 2 is not going to be able to see it.
Right. And I have two remarks I want to mention. One is we had, last Thursday, we had our meeting, which is the Citizens of Community Association of South Bowie meeting. And one of the officers who was covering for Officer Sims at that particular time, he saw the signs that were posted, and he actually attended our meeting on the spur of the moment. So we were happy to get that interaction with him, and he gave us some good details and good information. And then one of the residents, she's on the board of directors for Tall Oaks Crossing. And on Pin Oak Parkway, which is the long stretch road that goes into Tall Oaks Crossing, they had a problem with a commercial truck that was there just staying there, you know, and you know the lane is not that, the street is not that wide anyway. But anyway, she contacted Officer Sims, and Officer Sims was able to contact the owner of the commercial vehicle, because it had the name on it. I think it was a moving truck or something like that. So the long and the short of it is, by working together, by making that contact with Officer Sims, she was extremely pleased, and she wanted me to let you know that. So I just wanted to pass that on, and you can pass on to Officer Sims that the residents of Tall Oaks Crossing are very much thankful for the outstanding job and the quickness, the promptness of which he took care of the problem that they had. So that's it for me tonight.
I'm glad that's the way it's supposed to work, and then we're trying to get a little deeper into those HOA.
Oh, I do have one other thing, and this is, I'm gonna sneak this one in, because I'm really not supposed to do this, but I'm gonna sneak it in anyway. And it's really not totally your problem. It's actually like a state problem. But here it is. Here's the scenario. At this meeting, I was also confronted by one of the board members for Cullington Station. And Cullington Station, that's Jennings Mill Road, and the opposite street on the opposite side is Devonwood. So when you're leaving Devonwood to go to Cullington Station or vice versa, the traffic is not lined up. So if you're going straight, you have to really dodge cars. And I was told that there have been a number of accidents that occurred there, so that's the reason why I'm bringing it up on your watch, because I don't know if there were a number of accidents there, but I don't need you to answer that. But I am trying to get the city manager's ear, and also one of our delegates who is here from the state of Maryland. Here's the suggestion, and it's a really great suggestion that they had. Instead of trying to reconfigure the lanes, rechannel the lights, just like you do at Church Road. Because the lights are channeled at Church Road differently than what they are at the next intersection going down. And I think if we can get those lights, Mr. City Manager and Delegate Holmes, if we could get those lights rechanneled, I think that would solve the problem. So I snuck that in. Okay.
And we'll do the research for the accident part.
Good for you.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Mr. Wolfley.
Thank you very much for the report. Appreciate the information. A couple of things that I'll expound upon. The issue of getting staff is not unique to you. I was over at the employment fair that was at the city gym over the weekend, and I spoke to Maryland Transportation Authority's police folks there and talked to them about their hiring needs. And he told me that they were hiring, they would get something in the neighborhood of a couple hundred people who would submit applications, and then maybe only 15 to 20% would actually show up for the exam. And then of the people who showed up for the exam, maybe only half of them would be qualified. And then from there, they have to go through the actual process of getting a background check. And then, of course, by the time it's all done, they still have to be interested in the job and not employed by someone else somewhere else. So it's, I know it's a difficult fact of life at the moment, and hopefully we'll see some improvements in that area. I was pleased to hear that people were just generally like the idea of working in Bowie and have respect for our force as well. So that bodes well for us. Also, for those that haven't seen the safest places to live, top 3 for the city. So that was good to see, and a lot, of course, has to do with the good work that your officers are doing. So thank you for that effort. Couple of questions on some of the information. The statistics that you have, do you have anything that you could share with us regarding geolocation type of things? So, for example, as Dr. Trouth was speaking of accidents, can you share with us some geographic hotspots for accidents or different types of crimes, so that we can look at some different programs to mitigate some of the risks there? For example, if we can go hat in hand with some of the hotspots on the accident side, and we may be able to get a little bit of extra traction on the CIP side at both the county and the state level, and in fact our own roads if need be as well. Same thing on the other types of crimes, whether it's commercial theft or housing and so forth. I'd like to be in a position that if there's certain areas in my district that are facing any type of crime problems that are disproportionate, I'd like to be in a position where we could try and do something with those members of the community to make them aware, if there are. I know that the numbers are very small to begin with, so that's good news, but I think anything we can do that helps on the geographic identification, that would be great. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm going to actually defer to the Deputy Chief on that one. He gave me a poke there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and good evening, Council. Our crime analyst has a software package called ArcGIS that we're just in the beginning phases of starting to utilize. That'll give us the ability to map a lot of our crime data, which will assist us in the crime meetings that we're having weekly, as well as we operate under the records management system provided by Prince George's County, and they have a product which was developed by Motorola called Command Central, which should be forward-facing, public-facing. That will be placed on the website once it's available, which then will allow our residents to be able to search crime data also through the website. So those things are work in progress, should be coming here soon within the next 60 to 90 days. We're hopeful to be able to have those capabilities at that point.
That's outstanding. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. The next question I have is on the dispensary issue. I mean, not issue, but the fact of the matter is the dispensaries are in existence. Have we seen any issues around those areas? I mean, I recognize that those are cash and carry type operations, and I get nervous that they're wherever there's cash and things like that hanging around, it tends to attract trouble.
No, we have actually had no problems at all with the local dispensary. We actually went in, took a tour, looked at some of their security and some of their processes, and we haven't had any problems at all with them.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Before I go to Mr. Estev, I just happened to notice that Delegate Geraldine Valentino-Smith has slid in the back and sitting there. I hope your ears were buzzing, because we were saying some really nice stuff about you a few minutes ago. I'm sorry? Oh, maybe the airways got out there. But now that you're here, on behalf of all, I want to thank you for everything you've done and help us bring those people together on the Bowie racetrack issue. Your role and the delegation's role has been truly noted and truly appreciated. And I know the numerous phone calls and text messages and emails we've shared have been very helpful in keeping things online. And the legislative effort that will now include the Bowie racetrack as one of the potential recipients of state funding is going to go a long way to helping us with our problem. So just to let you know, while you weren't here, we were saying nice things about you. Mr. Estelle.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And I'll just add that the delegate and all three of our delegates in our state center, and we have...
We can almost have a delegation meeting here.
We almost have a delegation meeting tonight, but we have a really great relationship with all of them, and Delegate Smith has me on speed dial and, talks to me constantly about, challenges of mutual concern, and we're very lucky to have a great working relationship with our whole delegation. Not all communities have that, so I just want to say that with them in the room. Good evening, Chief, Deputy Chief. Thank you for joining us for a late night tonight.
Good evening, sir.
So right off the bat, I just want to say a big thank you for all the tremendous public outreach that you've done over the years and continue to do. I don't know too many departments that are quite as engaged and active and show up to things in the community, and Chief in particular always seems to be wearing jogging clothing and is out running marathons and half marathons for fundraisers and the like in perpetuity, and we really appreciate that. We have a very visible and engaged department, and I think our community appreciates that as well. You guys have probably attended more HOA meetings than I have in the last 4 years, which was absolutely wonderful. I noticed that assaults, thefts, moving violations, and shoplifting, we've seen a bit of an uptick this last year. Particularly with the shoplifting and the assaults, I'm curious, any particular variety that we're seeing? Is there something in the water? Do we have any insights?
The assaults, again, it's all, and again, I don't want to give the impression it's people jumping out of the bushes and punching other people.
Very often it's domestic.
They all know, all the assailants are known to each other. I have absolutely no psychological explanation for it.
Okay.
Some of them are domestic related, some are just kids fighting. I don't know if it's people reporting more, or if it's just goes along with the intemperate climate that we have nationally at the moment. But there's been an uptick in them. Once we try to delve deeper into the data, I get it. It's all arguments. It's all people who know each other, don't like each other for some reason, or they just. There's a lack of civility and lack of able to express your emotions without putting hands on folks lately. Now, one of the things that we can look at, if it's targeted through the high school regions, if there's mediation processes. I know that Officer Foote is involved as the SRO, and I know that they work through the school to try to mediate a lot of the issues. But it's something that is a wider problem that we'll have to try to get a better handle as far as we can. Sometimes it's just out of our purview.
Gotcha. I'm sure departments all across the country are sitting at council meetings, just like this one, referencing the national intemperate climate. I suspect you're probably onto something there. You mentioned with regards to kind of recruitment challenges, which certainly aren't unique to us. Some of those things you kind of referenced that might be causing it are a bit out of our control. You mentioned policies regarding cannabis use. We don't, as far as I know, in our hiring policies, we don't look necessarily like at alcohol use all that much. Are we reaching that point where we need to start reevaluating policies and maybe determining that cannabis use in a personal life isn't really an indicator of a person's character or performance, especially as it becomes decriminalized?
It has to be that's a larger statewide conversation. Actually, I'm current president of the Prince George's Chiefs Association, which puts me on the training commission. And that's something that we've been talking about, especially given the medical cannabis and the changing viewpoints of them socially, whether you agree or not. I'll leave my opinion on the table or in my pocket. But there's something we have to look at. I'm trying to walk a tightrope here.
It's something that
it's something we look at, but it's out of our hands anyway at this point. Once the training commission, they look at hiring standards and they set the hiring standards. We do occasionally have people that come with waivers in front because we've already loosened some of the usage. But again, it's difference between experimenting when you're in high school or college or after a certain age when you should know better. Whether you like it, agree with it or not, it's still illegal. And that's at the point that you have to look at. At some point, you decide that I want to be a police officer, which means you have to obey the law. Whether you agree with that law or not, it's still up to you to follow it until it's changed. And then that gets to be the biggest sticking point, because one of the things you look at as an officer's candidate is decision-making. And if you can't make that decision now, who's to say you're going to be able to make it after you get the responsibility of a gun and a badge? We enforce laws. We don't break them. And we enforce laws that we don't agree with sometimes, but it's still the law and you have to enforce it. So that's kind of the standpoint that the Training Commission as a whole is taking at this point. If that changes down the road, then we'll change with it.
Fair enough. A lot of the data that you provide comparing kind of you and Bowie is extremely helpful, and we appreciate that that's compiled and that that's available. One of the things I've talked about in the past is being able to look at comparisons to other similar communities. Is it possible that even if yearly or every other year, data could be made available so that we can kind of see how we're doing relative to other communities in the region? Or maybe are there resources that we can look at independently, maybe FBI statistics or anything that could be useful?
We can start to dig into that. Unfortunately, what you start to sometimes get into is people calculate and keep different stats. We can go on the UCR data, which is supposed to be the most unified and harmonious set, but even then they're getting ready to redefine some of that and go to something else.
What is, you mentioned UCR?
UCR is the Uniform Crime Report, which is the FBI, the data the FBI collects.
That's the data the FBI collects. Okay, cool.
But even those definitions are different than local definitions sometimes. And it's just variances, but something we would define as something maybe different for UCR purposes. But that's the only, I guess, uniform, since it's Uniform Crime Report. I'm tired, I'm sorry. But that's the only really apples to apples you can sometimes look at. But we can definitely see what our crime analysts can come up with.
Gotcha. This next one is partially public safety, partially public works. We talked recently with George Stefanos about making it a little bit easier in the process for residents to gather petitions for things like speed humps. And changes in traffic patterns. I think there was kind of agreement up here that we wanted to make that a little bit easier on folks, given that this is a perennial concern and one that you guys hear about constantly. From your perspective, does making speed humps more easily attainable and more prevalent a useful tool in the long term for, in fact, slowing down speeding, or are we just lulling ourselves into a false sense of security with that?
No, I think there's pluses and minuses, and personal opinion, speed humps have their place. It's not every 5 feet on every road, but they're a useful tool, but I think you need to still keep some kind of reasonable benchmark, especially when you're affecting entire neighborhoods and you're affecting an entire population or of that small population in the neighborhood. I think you do need some kind of consensus that they're welcome there. Whatever that benchmark, George or anybody else determines, you still need some. They're not always the answer to everything. Sometimes they're the easiest answer that's in front of you, but it's not always the most prudent one to use.
I know that we hear constantly that when you guys do out and do the traffic enforcement, the people who are speeding the most and the most consistently are usually the people who live next door to the people complaining about the speeding. In our experience, I think we find that non-speeders are more likely to vote, speeders are less likely to vote. And so I think that there's a self-selection of who we're hearing from when it comes to this issue. And that's definitely a conversation I want to continue having with you guys and with Public Works. Last thing, I do get questions every now and again about jurisdictional work between you guys and the departments that manage the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning locations, that sometimes there's some jurisdictional challenges there. Can you guys talk to me a little bit about that? Anything that you've seen in particular? Anything we ought to be doing differently?
I know that, especially given an old Bowie, there was an issue that is actually outside the city and park property. Okay. But I know that I communicate with Chief Johnson on a, not fairly regular, but he's got my number and I got his. So I actually transferred that one complaint that I'm thinking about over to him. Hopefully they were getting some attention there. We are looking into a more official MOU with Park. In the meantime, even if it's park, a lot of times that we have the issue where it can come up as if it goes to park, it doesn't always come to us, and vice versa. So that's something we still need to work on, is communicating better and getting that sharing of information. Because sometimes the areas that are under park control are a little more isolated. And honestly, our officers don't always do the dip into the park because it's really not our jurisdiction. But that is something that Chief Johnson and I were speaking about, I guess, a couple meetings ago. We just need to follow up on it.
If you guys are working on an MOU, I think that'd be really helpful. And it's not a huge thing, but it is something that I do hear about every now and again, and particularly the park on off of Millstream Drive, the name of which I just forgot. And the park, you know, the little ones that are within the jurisdiction, apparently even those sometimes are the source of some challenges there. So an MOU would be wonderful if that could be worked out.
And I know the one off of Millstream, we actually, we did some enforcement and some, I'll call it wave the flag, but we, we went in and made sure our presence was seen, because I know they did have some issues with folks hanging out doing some things they weren't supposed to be doing.
Gotcha. Thanks for coming out tonight, Chief and Deputy Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Let me just wrap up with a couple of things. It's not news to you that we're very proud of you guys and what you do, and I'm very proud of what you're doing. But I got to tell you, that little clip that just showed the global focus, and if you look at it for seriously, you and your group there were interacting with people from different parts of the world with different perspectives. People will look different, act different, but the message that comes through is very common, very simple, and that is everybody matters, everybody's important. And even if we look at the news and see all these cultural conflicts going on in the world, I think what you did in there and what your group did in there was incredibly important. So, aside from the normal things that you guys do very well, that's impressive. I just want to take a moment to thank you for that. It's often said up here that that you have achieved a lot of respect in the community. The quality of leadership, the quality of staff that you've assembled, and the way the men and women that work for you guys do their work is incredible. And you've gotten that respect the old-fashioned way. You earned it. I couldn't be more proud of what you're doing. You've hit every milestone that we laid out for you at the moment of growth, and you've done it earlier, and you've done it more effectively than maybe we anticipated. And I've seen you work with the business community, the school communities, the fraternal communities, the social communities. I've seen you interact with stakeholders. I mean, you collectively mean an department, and looking at active shooter incidents to train from that and look at other people's experience and learn from that. Trying to anticipate the unexpected and be prepared for that. So I just want to say, on behalf of all of us up here, that we're very proud of the progress that you guys have made and the level of service that you provide our community. You've gotten to be very expensive, but you guys are doing a great job. So if you would convey our appreciation to the men and women of your organization and thank them when we don't get a chance sometimes to see them on a personal level and express our true appreciation for every call they respond to and every call they handle well. You'd be surprised at how many anecdotal accounts we get back from people in the community that talk about interactions and experiences they've had with the police, and they are overwhelmingly positive. So on behalf of all of us, thank you for what you did. Thank you for a great report tonight.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it. Dr. Trout?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move for adjournment.
Moved and seconded by Mr. Marcos. Any questions on the motion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you, folks.